Good morning. I'm super excited and honored to be here and to kick off what I hope will be 2 amazing days. So I'm going to be talking about Beam teams, or it'll really apply to all software engineering teams, I hope. But, I'll focus on Elixir, which is what I use, and Erlang. So the reason for this talk is that in my past 6, 7 years of being a developer, I've been on all sides of the coin when it comes to learning on the job, trying to find that first job, to now being involved with hiring new people and sometimes teaching them on the job. And I think in a world where there's so much focus on people trying to find those senior engineers that we miss the opportunity to invest in the less experienced, more junior developers to, keep our community alive and have the future of the language. So, a little bit about me, hopefully. There we go. So, this is me. My name is Sanne Kalkman. You can find me on Twitter with the very original handle, @SanneKalkman. I am a former teacher, which I'll tell you all about a little bit more in a minute. And I am also a former junior developer, which I guess goes for all of us. And like Eric said, I live in Amsterdam with my partner and 2 very fluffy cats, of which one is shown on screen. He was very happy about being in this photo, as you can tell. So my original education is English. I have a degree in English literature, I have a teaching degree, and I used to be a high school English teacher. And at some point, even though I loved teaching, and I still do, it wasn't what I wanted to do. So I decided to retrain, started learning, started with free code camp and all that kind of stuff, until eventually I landed my first real job as an Elixir developer. So I'm wondering, how many of you had their first job that was a Beam language? That's roughly, I'd say 10-15% of the audience, for those of you who can't see the audience, which is honestly a bit more than I expected. I thought it would be less. But that's actually great. And how many of you are currently junior developers? A smattering of hands. Good, that means the point of my talk still stands. Otherwise, if everybody raised their hand, we'd have a problem. Anyway, I am now no longer a junior developer. I am, in fact, a senior developer. That's how that goes, generally, hopefully, for most people. And I currently work at CodeSandbox. We're a startup based in the Netherlands, but we have people from all over the world. We're a collaborative IDE where you can run code and write code in the browser. And I'm not going to do a long pitch, but I will tell you what I think is the coolest thing and the saddest thing about CodeSandbox right now. Right now, I think the coolest thing is that we have live branch sharing. So if I am working on my repository, I create a branch, and I'm working on it, I can just send you the link, and you can jump right into my running environment working with me at the same time in my branch. No need to check out, install dependencies, etc. And I think that's pretty cool, and that makes it very collaborative. The saddest thing is that we currently don't yet have Elixir support. I know. But if I keep saying it on stage, maybe we'll get it faster. So for the next 40 minutes or so, I'll be taking you through the following 3 things. Why should we care about hiring more junior developers or less experienced developers? Because I'll be saying junior developers a lot, but what I really mean is anybody who might not yet be at exactly the level that your ideal perfect candidate would be. Somebody who needs a chance to prove themselves, needs a chance to grow. So first up, we'll have a look at why you should care. Why is this a good thing? And then hopefully, once I've convinced you, we'll look at how do you find them and how can you assess if somebody will be right for your team. And then lastly, you've decided that you care, you found somebody. How can you help them do a good job and become successful? So, up first, why should we care? Well, we just did a little show of hands about how many junior developers are currently here. It wasn't that many. And that doesn't surprise me because whenever I've been looking for jobs, there's what feels like 100 junior developers for one position and 100 positions for one senior developer. And you can see that that might be a problem, right? If nobody is willing to invest in the next generation of developers, then nobody's going to have these developers when they need them. And I would, in fact, posit it even more strongly. I think that a community without beginners has no future. In the Elixir and Erlang community, I've often found that we think that Elixir and Erlang are difficult and that it's hard to learn if you're a beginner and that you need significant experience in some other language before you can even get started. I don't think that's true. I am living proof that that is not true. I came for my, I did a boot camp that was in Java, which I didn't touch after the day I finished it. And I ended up working at a telecom company in Elixir, not Erlang, surprisingly. And they were in the process of moving from Ruby to Elixir. And I had never written a line of either in my entire life. But for some reason, they thought that I had potential, I could probably figure it out. And, well, I would hope that the fact I am standing here today is evidence that I did figure it out, or at the very least, that I've managed to fake it till I made it. But I do think that having only experienced developers in a community becomes a vicious cycle. Because once you become too experienced at something, too good at something, you lose that connection to what it means to be a beginner. And the more knowledge all our resources assume, the harder it becomes. Like, you see what I mean? It perpetuates. And at some point, our community will become less accessible, and the hurdles along the way for younger and not necessarily younger, newer developers, less experienced developers, will only become higher. In addition to that, I think that the best teams that I've worked on, my favorite teams, have been those with a wide variety of people. Now, if you work on, I don't know, very critical hospital software that absolutely can't fail, okay, maybe that is not the team to let a newbie loose in. But in by far most applications, by far most pieces of software, not all the work is simply really challenging or, I mean, it's interesting, but not everything requires a senior developer to do it. So, for example, the CodeSandbox backend it's a Phoenix application. We talk to the database, we have a bunch of WebSocket stuff going on. And a good chunk of the actual features that I do come down to a simple CRUD endpoint. Just a get or a post to create something in the database. And, well, I don't mind doing those, and I can do those pretty quickly by now. They're not the most interesting for me to do anymore by this point. But if we had someone on the team who was newer to backend development, then that would still be a great learning opportunity. So I do think that most teams need a balance of experienced and less experienced people. You need the experienced people because otherwise it might devolve into chaos. But you also need those inexperienced people because often there just isn't enough exciting, interesting, technically difficult work to keep a whole team of senior engineers engaged and excited and learning. Because whenever I talk to people who are looking for a new job, a very common reason is I'm not learning anything anymore. I feel like I'm stagnating. And if everybody on your team is experienced, then that will probably be the case for somebody. In addition to that, I also think that having diverse teams is a good way to have an exciting, there it is a good way to have good, well-functioning teams. And I mean that in the broadest sense. Different backgrounds. I have an English degree, and that means that my strengths are probably different than somebody who has a computer science degree, right? If you need the most perfectly performant, proven to be correct algorithm, I'm probably not the one who's going to write that. And that's fine. However, if that same algorithm needs to be explained to stakeholders or business or, taught to more junior developers so they understand what's going on, well, I have a teaching degree, so I'll be able to do that. And, different backgrounds and different skills make for a good team. And similar to that, unfortunately, the Elixir community and also Erlang community is still overwhelmingly male and white. And, and that historically, I guess that makes sense. But if we invest in a newer, more diverse generation of developers, then we can keep our community growing, alive, and make it more diverse in one go. So that's why I think it's a good idea. However, I am sure your HR managers, etc., might think, well, that's nice, duty to the community, but what's in it for us? Well, I think, first of all, your duty to the community should be a good enough reason. But I also think that having junior developers on your team forces everybody else to be clearer in their communication, to explaining something helps you learn it. I've been in many situations where I thought I really understood something, and then somebody asked me, but why did you do it exactly like that? And then as I tried to explain it, I realized that I maybe understood 70% and not actually as much as I thought. So I have learned the most through teaching others. So hopefully you are now convinced. And if not, you can take it up with me afterwards. So you're convinced, you're like, okay, you know what? Next job ad, we're going to try to add a junior developer or a less experienced developer to our team. How are we going to find them? Well, there's a few ways you can do this, right? You can find them, or you can help them find you. Some of it might require going out in the community. For example, the bootcamp that I did, we had a job fair before you could even start. There was a job fair, and only the people who got a job offer could even start. Which on the one hand might be a bit strange to do it, because what if you don't interview well, but you succeed very well at the bootcamp? But on the other hand, it was nice because what I've heard from lots of people who have done other boot camps was that, they finished the boot camp, that was all nice, but they still couldn't get that first job. So offer that first job. Be the one who goes to a boot camp and go, okay, well, I guess you learned Java or JavaScript. or something else altogether, but clearly you like learning, so want to give Erlang a try? And similarly, for them to find you, a lot of it comes down to a good job ad. Regardless of if enough people see it, I think that a bad job description filters out a lot of good candidates. I don't know about you, but if I see a job ad that says they're looking for a rock star or a unicorn or whatever, then I'm immediately less inclined to apply to that job. I'm like, well, that's not me. It could be me, but it's not how I see myself and not how I want to be. So I think that for job ads, it is much more important to focus on the traits that you're looking for, maybe some of the skills and experience, but I think we get too hung up on people being familiar with our exact tech stack. Mixed up my vowels there. For example, sure, we use Phoenix and Postgres, and yeah, will it be easier coming in if you've already used that? But if you've written a little node application that has, REST endpoints or whatever, you've probably already got enough of a mental model to switch gears and apply that knowledge in a new situation. And I think that, technology can be taught, but a certain attitude towards learning is much harder to teach. And I was looking at job ads doing research for this talk. Unsurprisingly, I found mostly ads for senior jobs. But the few ones that I found that were open to junior developers all required a computer science degree, which is, to a certain extent, like I said, you might want to have a mix on your team, right? If somebody has a computer science degree, that's probably helpful for certain, like, technically advanced algorithmic stuff that you might have to do. But on the other hand, people from different backgrounds bring valuable perspectives. And I think that when it comes to more junior developers, the best way to try and evaluate them is to try and assess their potential. So you can tell that I'm currently doing a bachelor's in mathematics, because this is a beautiful equation. Anyway, yeah, so I think that two things to look for to see if somebody can grow into a role are engagement and trajectory. And by engagement, I mean, are they eager to learn? Are they invested in learning? And this is a little bit hard to assess, but if I were interviewing a junior developer to join CodeSandbox as an Elixir developer, if somebody came in who was like, yeah, so I've never really written Elixir, but I worked through the tutorial and I really like this and this about it, but this confused me, then I think that's a big selling point, that person already dove in, took the initiative to start learning a little bit. Whereas if somebody came in and said, yeah, I don't actually know what it is, but it seems cool, I guess, then, well, I mean, obviously there's a lot of other factors, but if it came down to just that, I would probably choose the person who showed the engagement and the initiative to already start learning a bit. And by trajectory, I should have picked an easier to pronounce word. By trajectory, I mean both past evidence of what they've learned and how they've approached that, but also the direction they see themselves go in and how that would fit with the direction you would need them to grow in. One question that I like is, what are you better at now than you were 6 months ago? And how did you get better at it? What did you do to improve? In my case, I am probably better at. I should have thought of this before I went on stage. I'm sure I'm better at lots of things. um, I'm better at debugging really annoying WebSocket issues because we keep having issues where we deploy and then we have too many WebSockets and everything goes to hell on deploy. And this is definitely not just me. Very big credit to my teammates in the audience who did a lot of work on trying to figure this out. We're not there yet. It still goes to hell when we deploy. But I'm better at knowing what the hell is going on there now than I was 6 months ago. And but it also goes for the future. What do you want to be better at? And that can be technical, it can be different. For me personally, the next 6 months, I'd like to be better at being more involved with like the product. Knowing more about where we're going, what the big picture is. Because, I write my code all day, I do my features, but sometimes I miss the big picture. And that is a thing that I want to be better at. And I think those questions give you good insight in what somebody, how somebody learns, what they approach. But forgive them if they don't have a good answer on the spot, like I just did with myself. So now you have a junior developer, you found somebody. How do you help them thrive? That's probably the most important, because you can have somebody really talented, but if you don't provide them with the support and the environment they need, then you're setting them and your team up for failure. The most important things that I noticed when I started, my first job, I had to learn Elixir on the job, was I got the right combination of independence and support. And this is a fine balance to strike, right? Because you want people to figure out stuff on their own, do research, find their own way, but you also don't want them to float around for too long and get stuck and get demotivated. I don't have the perfect tip on how to do that, because it depends per person, right? I get stubborn. I'm like, no, I'm going to figure it out on my own, and don't talk to me until I figured it out. And sometimes that's a bad habit, because if I had just asked, it would have been much easier and faster. And on the other hand, some people maybe lack the confidence in their own, debugging skills, or they just don't yet have the overview to figure stuff out on their own. Or if they're really a beginner, you might not even know yet what you don't know. So that balance is, I think, really important for success. And give them a chance to grow. Once they've done a few very simple tasks, involve them in something bigger, pair with them, help them grow and give them the chance to prove themselves and to grow beyond their level. And actually, the most important part of this, I think, is that your team, and ideally your company as a whole, is a safe environment for asking questions, for learning, but also for failing. So, for example, one thing that really helped me when I was learning was that none of my coworkers ever made me feel like I asked a dumb question. They often were like, oh yeah, I used to be confused about that. It's this and this. And I think that I currently try to do is to model asking questions. I have happily accepted the role of the person who asks that dumb question that nobody wants to ask, but at least half the people are confused about. And I think that's a really important role, because it clears up things. So model asking those dumb questions. And also, tell people that their questions weren't dumb in public. So, for example, when I was working at Tele2, we got acquired by T-Mobile. And we got a new manager, and we had this big meeting, and they were throwing abbreviations and acronyms around, and half of them I had no idea what they were. 'Cause I'd just been there for, I don't know, 6 months, and these were all these networking terms that, honestly, I was there for 2 years. I still probably don't know most of them. But anyway, sometime in that meeting, I raised my hand and I was like, could you please, explain what all these letters mean? I mean, does the T stand for telecom? I don't know. And the new manager said, I don't remember his exact words, but it was very snarky. He said something along the lines of like, if you don't know that, why are you even working here? And as you can imagine, that like really took me off guard and just kind of crushed my confidence in that moment. And afterwards, one of my coworkers came up to me and he was like, oh, don't worry about it. It's fine. I also didn't know what that meant. And while that's really nice, what would have been more helpful was if he had said that at that moment to, when that manager was also there and had not come to my rescue, but, if he had publicly shown that, like, no, this wasn't a dumb question. I also didn't know this. So model that safe environment also in public. And if you have the authority or like the respect to do that without it reflecting badly on you, use that power to help the people who are less powerful or less experienced in that sense. Because now at CodeSandbox, I was the 9th person who joined. We're now at 30 people. I'm basically part of the furniture at this point. So I can afford to say dumb stuff. But somebody who just came in 2 months ago probably has more questions than I do and is still more worried about looking dumb. So now you have this nice environment, hopefully. I want to go a little bit into detail about some more some models about learning and sharing knowledge to give a bit more of a scientific, psychological idea in how you can learn and how you can teach. So I want to very briefly talk about the Dreyfus model of skills acquisition, which was developed in the 1980s. And with all of these models, there's no one model that perfectly encapsulates how everybody learns everything. But I have found this model useful to think about how we learn things and how we can combine people from different skill levels to help them grow the best. So Dreyfus discusses 5 stages. When you first learn something, you're a novice. Oh, those letters are a bit smaller than I thought. I'm sorry. I hope they're still legible. First, you're a novice, which means you learn the rules and you very strictly follow the rules because you don't yet know enough to go beyond that. Then you become an advanced beginner. You're starting to get the hang of it a little bit, and you start experimenting. So, as an example, I'm going to take sewing. I've been sewing for probably over 20 years by now. But when I first started, I would follow the instructions for a sewing pattern to the letter. If they said, you have to make this dress out of cotton, then I would do that, no questions asked. I would follow every step in the instructions in the exact order. And because that's how you start. You start by following the rules. Then when I became a little bit more confident, I might change up the fabric. I'll be like, well, what if I use silk? It'll be, nice and drapey. I might do the instructions out of order. I might start hacking the sewing patterns, as they call it. What if the sleeves are short instead of long? And you learn more conditional rules. Like, usually you shoot A, except when you should do B. Then you become competent, hopefully. And then you have more context, more understanding. You can start to see the bigger picture. but you still pretty much rely on the rules, on applying the rules. And this is actually a pretty good level to pair up with a novice, because they see the bigger picture, but they are still close enough to being a beginner that they can remember the struggles and that they can still explain, hopefully, quite well what's going on. Once you become proficient, you've amassed quite a lot of skills. You're a pretty solid seamstress. You're, probably a senior developer at this point. You know what you don't know. You know where to find it. You can solve complex problems, but you haven't yet fully internalized the knowledge. Like, you still have to think about what you're doing. Only once you become an expert, and I think not many people reach expert level at many skills throughout their lifetime. Because this is not about a person, right? This is about a skill. You might be, I want to take piano lessons. That was my reward for myself when I finished this talk. You can take piano lessons. So then I'll be a novice. I'll just, do my, what are those called? My scales. But when it comes to sewing and knitting, I'm an expert. I just know how to do things. I know why I need to do things. But I don't really think about the rules anymore. It has become automatic. I can look at like the shirt that you're wearing and go like, oh, that's sewn like that and like this kind of fabric. But if somebody were to ask me, yeah, okay, but why do you do it like that? Or like, how do you know what fabric to use? And I'm like, I don't know, I just feel it, and then it's right, or it's not right. So as you can tell, once you're an expert, you're probably not the best teacher anymore, because you've internalized the knowledge so much that it becomes really difficult to make it concrete and explain it. An example that most of you can probably relate to is your native language. If somebody is learning your language and they go, but why do you say it like this? Why is that the word order? Quite often your answer is, I don't know, because that's just right. Because as native speakers, right, we're at the expert level of our languages. We've just internalized what is right, what is wrong, and outside of a classroom, we probably don't think a lot about why the word order is in a certain way. Because especially if you didn't do a language degree like I did, you probably don't think about syntax and word order all that much. But if you're learning a new language, especially when you're still in the advanced beginner or competent stage, you probably really have to think about every sentence. What is the tense? Is it singular? Is it plural? Is it a strong verb, a weak verb? Wait, I don't actually think if that's what they're called. Like, is it a regular verb or an irregular verb is what I'm trying to say. That was a little bit of Dutch slipped in there. But see, so if you're an expert, it becomes hard. So what makes good pairings? If you put a novice and an expert together, somebody's going to cry. It's probably the novice. But it might also be the expert who's just like, why do you keep asking these dumb questions? It just is. And the novice will be like, okay, but why? Why don't you just answer my simple question? So that's not usually the best combination. If you put two advanced beginners together, they'll probably learn a lot because they'll have come in with different things that they know, different things they experiment with. However, the result is probably not very stable. So I would say that the best combination is probably somebody who is competent or proficient together with a novice or an advanced beginner. Because especially if you're at the competent level, you know enough to lift up the less experienced person, but you still have that beginner's mindset that we sometimes lose when we become too experienced. And that brings me to, I should have remembered to move my note cards. There we go. So that brings me to the next thing that I kind of want to talk about, which is two different kinds of knowledge. Again, there's so many models of this, and they all have different, angles. But this one is by Nonaka and Takeuchi, which is two Japanese guys who wrote a model about how knowledge gets distributed and created in companies. And I found this, for me, seemed like a sensible, helpful model to think about this. So they distinguish two types of knowledge. Both tacit knowledge, which is kind of like the expert level knowledge. It's like the stuff you just know. It's personal, it's skills, and it's kind of difficult to explain. And there's both technical tacit knowledge, which is stuff like muscle memory and what you learn via an apprenticeship, perhaps. And there is cognitive tacit knowledge, which is more about the way you see the world and your mental model of the world. And then on the other hand, we have explicit knowledge, which is, it's not written knowledge, not in the sense that it physically has to be on paper, but in the sense that it's clear and you could write it down, as opposed to the kind of wishy-washy, I know this, but I can't really explain why, tacit knowledge. So it's more clear and it's more direct. And to create new knowledge and to learn things, we need to go to and from tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge and vice versa. So they have a lovely spiral for that. I didn't draw it as a spiral on the slides because no matter what I tried, it looked terrible. So we're going to have a knowledge list, but imagine that it's a spiral. So one of the first ones is, they call it socialization. And that is where you go from tacit knowledge to tacit knowledge. In a company, in a technical perspective, pair programming is probably the most common way where tacit knowledge does get passed on. Of course, there's also explicit knowledge when you explain, but simply observing somebody and working with them will, you will kind of absorb the knowledge. And the most common of this is apprenticeships. And, if I wanted to teach you how to knit, I couldn't tell you. Well, I could be okay, you have to put the needle in and you wrap the yarn, but that movement has become so automatic to me that I would just go, okay, let me just show you, because I can't explain it in words. And then hopefully that would become your tacit knowledge as well. The other way around, we have explicit to explicit knowledge. This is perhaps the most easy one. You exchange factual knowledge, meeting, conference talks. I did a bunch of reading. I took a bunch of explicit knowledge. I took some of my tacit knowledge, and now I'm giving it to you as explicit knowledge. And then we have externalization, from tacit to explicit. And this is the most difficult, but also often the most crucial step in teaching somebody. Because, like we just said, that internalized knowledge, it's really hard to verbalize and to make it clear enough. And one good way to deal with this is to think in metaphors and analogies, to try and get your mental model of something across to somebody else. And related to that, the other way around, asking how and why questions is a good way to try and get somebody's tacit knowledge out of them. And then the last one is from explicit knowledge to tacit knowledge. This is probably the most traditional type of learning, right? You read a book, you practice the thing, now you can do the thing. But that requires practice. And I think for most of us, we do this a lot, right? You read something, you put it in practice, and hopefully, eventually, you don't need to look at the book anymore because you just know. And the way they think about it as a spiral because it is a continuous cycle of new knowledge, because new knowledge emerges, right? If I talk to one of you and you go, oh, and you offer me a whole new perspective, then that combines our knowledge and creates new knowledge. And that is a good way for teams to grow as a whole. And even junior developers bring new knowledge in that will hopefully revitalize the team and create new knowledge for everybody. So, to summarize, initially I hope that I convinced you that hiring less experienced developers is a good idea. We talked a little bit about how to find them, how to assess if they are a good asset to your team, and then we looked at how to support them and how to help them, both from like a social perspective, but also from a more like theoretical, how does learning work kind of perspective. So, in summary, I want to round off by saying that, like I said in the beginning, I am only here today because sometime a few years ago, somebody took a chance on me. I had no experience, I had nothing to show for it other than, I guess, a charming enough personality to make it through the interview. And they were like, you know what? You seem like you'll figure it out. So we're gonna give you a chance. And I would like to think that because I'm now a senior developer and I'm standing here giving an opening keynote, that I've proven myself, and I hope to prove myself many times over as time go on. But I am very grateful for that, and we all probably, if you think back, you probably also have like one opportunity or one situation where somebody gave you a chance and that just made a really big difference. So if you take away one thing from this talk today, it is that the best way to be grateful for that and to show your gratitude for the chances that people took on you in the past is to pay it forward. If you do one thing, it is open a door for somebody, pave the way, and help somebody succeed and thrive in ways that they perhaps didn't even know was possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanne. It's brilliant, beautiful talk, very inspiring.
Thank you.
So, we have time for Q&A. We have a mic, we have Sanne, we have an audience, we even have a virtual, at the back. You want to come here and use the mic, so the rest of the world can hear you, not only Stockholm.
Hi, thank you for the talk. Oh, is the mic working? Here we go. Okay, thank you for the talk. A lot of it I agree with. A lot of it references stuff I say a lot. But one of the problems that I have is, convincing somebody to take a chance on you, but you have to go and ask for that chance in the first place, right? And I think, that's another part of the problem, right? Is that you getting people to say, I think I could do that. Right,
yeah, definitely.
Is a big problem. And do you have what made you ask for the chance, right? Or how do you get people to say, I think that I could go for that job posting, have the confidence to try for something that they don't necessarily have the experience in, so that they can get a chance?
Yeah, I think that is really difficult, and it's something that I struggled with a lot. By now, my approach is, let other people say no to me. Don't select yourself out before even trying. Because even if it is no, you still haven't lost anything. And that's easier said than done, especially when you have these job ads that say, a rock star and blah, blah, blah. But try it. The worst that can happen is that they don't hire you, don't ask you for the interview, and then you're literally no better or worse off than you were before, except maybe a slightly bruised ego if you were confident. Oh, yeah. And the same with giving a talk. My very first talk, I was like, I don't know if it's good enough. And somebody said that to me. They was like, just send it in. If they hate it, they won't select you. But maybe they will like it. And if you don't send it in, nobody will ever get to hear it. And I think that speaking has actually been the thing that has helped me the most in my career. So if anybody is thinking of giving a talk, do it. Just send it in. And if it doesn't get selected, it doesn't. But it just might. And it might open so many doors that you didn't even know existed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
More questions in the room or in the world? There's a Nova app where you can ask questions virtually if you're not in the room and don't have access to the microphone here. Yeah,
Hi.
please.
Hi.
Could you put back the drive force model on the screen?
Yes.
Yeah, so I found that really interesting. I just wanted to offer a different perspective on that. So I'm in charge of hiring people, developers, and I can totally see developers fitting all these levels, and I just quite don't think that you necessarily say that one level is not usually the best teacher, maybe to a certain other level.
Yes,
right?
that
I
is
think
true.
that it's necessary to have a certain gap of knowledge so you can have a more effective knowledge transfer. But for example, the expert can be an excellent teacher for a competent one.
No, yes,
right?
you're totally right. That is that's definitely true, and that's a good point. I was focused a little bit more on junior developers, but you're right. I think teaching somebody who is 1 or 2 levels below you on a scale like this is probably good. But the gap from a novice to an expert would be too big. But you're right. If you're competent or proficient, you probably can benefit a lot from pairing, or especially just observing the expert. That's that is totally true. Good point.
Right. Another comment I wanted to make. Of course, the talk is a lot about the companies giving a chance to hire the juniors, but I also see the other side of this, because the way the professionals usually also behave in this field, you said earlier that they feel this lack of challenge and they switch jobs, and that happens quite quickly. And so one factor that really affects giving a chance to a junior is this amount of investment you have to do to bring them from the novice level upwards. And there is also this thing that the competent one, very often there is this self-perception that they are actually much better than what they are, and market really hits them, and then you dispute this professional around. So it's kind of hard because of the survivorship bias to get to the expert level. You have this huge gap, and how do you cope with that, right? Because
yeah, definitely. I think I agree. I do think it's, obviously, like, a point of a keynote is to inspire and to be a little bit controversial. But I agree, it's not always going to be as easy as I would like to make it sound. And it doesn't just have to be juniors, though. It can also just mean somebody who might be like 1 level below. If you're always looking for really senior developers, maybe try a mid-level developer once. So it doesn't always have to be starting from the ground up. But I see your point. It's probably more difficult than I make it out to be, and the investment is high. But it is. I would like to think that it's worth it. And not all teams are obviously ready for this. Because last year, I was the only one on my team, and we hired a more junior developer, and that was a bad idea, because I was on my own, and I just didn't have the time to teach and support well enough, in addition to doing all the stuff that needed to be done. So it is hard, and sometimes your team or you aren't ready to take on that. But then we should move towards getting ready and hopefully make a step in the right direction, even if we can't immediately take the deep dive.
Thank you.
Thank you.